However, we also heard that in order to survive and persevere, the press must stick to the good old rules of journalism. And this is why we decided to change the format of the conference and add professional workshops, and I hope many of you participated in some of them and were enriched by them. It is our hope that by strengthening the journalistic profession, we will eventually contribute something to the freedom of the press. I'd like to thank our partners, Professor Noam Lemel-Streich-Latar, Dean, and Rona Zahavi of the Sami Ofer School of Communications at IDC Herzliya, and Yair Tachitsky, Chairman of the Union of Israeli Journalists. Thanks so much for our friends from the International Organization of Press Clubs and European Federation of Press Clubs, Yaroslav Vlodarchik, Patricia Krantz, and Bill Collins, who are with us today. And thanks to the distinguished speakers who traveled many miles to be with us today. And last but not least, heartfelt thanks to the staff of JPC, Vanessa Kaczerginski, Raya Koval, Rachel Lagziel, Avia Asner, and the one and only Tal Buchnek, the coordinator of the conference. Applause, big applause. Exactly a week ago, we received a phone call from the office of President Reuven Rivlin, confirming his participation in this conference. This was great news to us because President Rivlin is a disciple of Zev Jabotinsky, himself a talented journalist and staunch proponent of press freedom. Exactly an hour later, his beloved wife Nechama passed away. We send our condolences to President Rivlin and wish him many more years of being a beacon of press freedom and democracy. This session is dedicated to the memory of Professor Moshe Negbi, of blessed memory, one of the most respected journalists in Israel in decades. I'm sure many of us here miss his voice on the radio. And even when his voice became hoarse because of his illness, it nevertheless came across loud and clear when he spoke fearlessly for the freedom of the press. I welcome the family, friends, and colleagues of Moshe Negbi, and I invite Moshe's son, Shimri, to say a few words, please.
Good evening. On behalf of my family and I want to thank the Jerusalem Press Club, the Union of Journalists in Israel, and the School of Communication at the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya for dedicating this next session to the memory of my father, Professor Moshe Negbi. My father fought his whole life to protect the freedom of speech and freedom of the press, values he considered as backbones of a democratic country. He did so by educating his students as a professor and the public as a journalist, by being a loud and clear voice which never backed down no matter what pressures he faced. He used to say that freedom of the press is not a privilege of the press, it's a privilege of the public, a principle which must be reminded in this age of demonization of the media. We feel that there is nothing more appropriate than dedicating this session on freedom of the press to the memory of my father, Moshe Negbi, and we are very, very thankful to everyone who made it happen and to all of you who came to participate. Thank you.
One of our partners in this conference is Media Line, the American news agency covering the Middle East, which was established here some 20 years ago. Among other assets, it has Mideast Streets, a shout out from the streets of the region in multimedia format, Mideast Daily News, Mideast Mindset section, which brings the news from the Arab and Israeli media in their own words and thoughts, and more. It is my pleasure to invite Felice Friedson, founder and president of Media Line, to give brief greetings.
Good evening, everyone. If you Google fake news about 1,080,000,000 results turns up. Real news, Google it, 14,110,000,000 results turn up. For trusted news, 640,000 results show up. On one hand, the future of journalism is in crisis, while on the other hand, the word news is getting a great deal of attention these days. The third Freedom of the Press conference, Journalism Under Siege, reminds us that as professionals we need to convene and explore the serious issues that we face and even threaten our fellow journalists. Thank you, Uri Dromi and the Jerusalem Press Club, and thank you, Dr. Noam Lemelstreich-Latar and Yair Tarshitsky. I want to also acknowledge the Daniel Pearl International Journalism Institute, which exists today in tribute to the slain Wall Street Journal journalists. It's grief we share at the Media Line, where our own Stephen Sotloff, another brilliant young correspondent, was brutally murdered by ISIS. Suppression of press freedom continues to plague the Middle East as a sharp tool of conflict, and sadly, there's no sight in end. It's getting worse as we face two great threats: the threat to journalists and the threat to journalism. It's been a horrific year on both scores. Look at Khashoggi, look at the many names that, of course, don't really see the same light of day. A recent Pew study found that 50% of Americans polled, they see that made-up news as a bigger problem than any other key issue, including violence, crime, climate change, racism, illegal immigration, terrorism, and sexism. Interestingly, we journalists are not blamed for most of them, well, not yet. Political leaders and activist groups, that takes first place. But as Americans, we believe that the Americans believe that the news media has the responsibility to fix it. And again, hear that. The Americans believe that we, as journalists, have the responsibility to fix this. Back in the day, when we watched Walter Cronkite, he said something and we, as the viewers, believed every word. We didn't doubt him, and today our end users are doubting the source, the core source, even on the increasingly rare occasions when full attribution is given. It's a crisis, no doubt. It's a crisis that we're not believed, and it's a crisis that a consumer of news is denied full attribution of entire stories. The devolving standards, too, spell crisis. The American Press Institute, through its Media Insight Project, found that the public doesn't understand key journalism terms or concepts. And this is very core, that the public themselves don't get some of the usage of language that we as journalists use each and every day. The word attribution, op-eds, sources, they don't have a clue. At the Media Line, we're working to fix it, at least some of the problems, and it's not surprising to learn that it's revolving around an educational initiative. We have 14 universities signed for credit, where students come and they learn in our bureau, and they actually source and spend hours of getting it right, as a matter of fact, and not necessarily first. So I applaud the efforts tonight to begin fixing some of the problems that shouldn't have been broken, and we as journalists need to really take heed to some of the very serious issues that we see and hear today. Thank you.
Thank you, Felice. I'd like to call upon Dan Marido, who's been, and I'm giving a very abridged CV here, okay? Just, I skipped some of the grade. He's been a member of some of the Knessets, several Knessets, and was a Minister of Justice in the early 90s, and then Minister of Finance, and then Minister without portfolio, but in charge of Intelligence and Strategic Affairs, and Deputy Prime Minister. And last but not least, he's the chairman of the advisory board of JPC, which I hope he appreciates on the same level as his former post. So, and may I say personally that Dan is also a disciple of Jabotinsky, and some of us here who were brought on in a socialist family are more, as time passes on, we look with some nostalgia to these people who are becoming an endangered species. That's my little personal thought. So Dan, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Erev Tov, good evening, everybody here. I am sorry that I stand here in for President Rivlin. He should have been here. Yes, we do come from the same mold, and we were brought up more or less the same ideology, but he is the president, and one of the only official figures who still speaks the old language that is now under attack, which is what I'm going to refer to. The second remark is to do with Moshe Negbi. Moshe and I have studied together. That is to say, he studied seriously, I less so, in the Faculty of Law in the Hebrew University years ago. And we've been good friends along the years, although sometimes he had the wrong views, but basically we agreed on many things, even to the point where they wanted to sack him from the radio because of his views, and I and my friend Benny Begin, another disciple of Jabotinsky, tried to help him, and we did help him to stay in power. He really was a very important voice in supporting, maintaining, promoting those values that the press has in its basket and is fighting for. Well, to speak of journalism under siege, I think democracy is under siege. The world is changing very rapidly, and the democracy that we have known, that has developed in the world in the last 200 years and so, is now being challenged very seriously all over the world. Of course, I care mainly about my country, but you can't overlook the fact that all the world sees a backlash from the 1945 end of the Second World War. Because of the horrors of the war, not only to us Jews, but the entire world, there was a very positive trend towards democracy, human rights, rule of law, against extreme nationalism, against totalitarianism. And all over the world, I have to say, not in the Arab world, but all over the world, you saw more and more democracy spreading all the way down or up to the collapse of communism, to this very day when Mr. Fukuyama thought we reached the end of history, we won. This was coupled with the technological development that allowed the world to become one world in a way, and people were empowered in an unprecedented way. In their smartphone, they know or can know everything. Never in human history was so much information potentially in the hands of so many people. Technology in the hand of people, finance in the hand of people. And as we spoke of the Second World War, the end of it was, among other things, that people, human rights, individuals, became more powerful, and they are protected by the international community. From the Nuremberg trial, where Germans were tried by laws that didn't exist for them, because German law did not say it's not allowed. So what we saw is the strengthening of individuals and rights and freedoms, and international community and charters doing that. Now one sees a backlash, a very strong and menacing, alarmingly menacing backlash from the individual or the world community back to identity of extreme nationalism or extreme religion as identity. And you can look at Hungary, you can look at Poland, you can look at the country I'll talk about in a minute, a very good friend of Israel on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. You could look at the rise of extreme fanaticism, Shia versus Sunnah, the importance of the evangelist. You see a different trend. I speak of technology because technology allowed something that was very hopeful and raised a lot of hopes. People can know everything. And what happened is the democracy that we knew, that was indirect democracy, representative democracy, is now under attack because leaders found out they can talk directly to the people down there, or up there if you like, without going through any intermediary. Press, Washington, that swamp should be dried, you know, professionals, who needs them? We can tweet the answer. We can talk on Facebook. We don't need those elites in between. And the attempt to return from indirect democracy to direct democracy is a huge challenge. Because if you want to make smart decisions, you need the experience, the wisdom that was accumulated and is in the hands of those people who are either elected to parliaments or are professionals you consult as economists, as lawyers, as defense specialists. All these are now hated and envied elites that are attacked all over the world. The press is one other intermediary between the leaders and the people. And it has a very important role in democracy, although it is free and should be free and not a government, a branch of the regime. Because in order to make decisions, people need to know what's going on. They need to know the facts. They need to have a place or a marketplace of ideas when things can be discussed. This was and used to be the role of the press that gave people the information and allowed for discussions and ideas to be raised and discussed. And now you see that the press is called the enemies of the people. Forgive me that quote another president, not Rivlin. The most dishonest people on earth. Who needs the professionals? So the press is now under two challenges. One is attacks for delegitimization. Who are they to tell us? We know better. We have the same information. Who needs them? The other is it's not alone in the field. What we call new media has developed a different mechanism, a different channel through which information comes and goes. Think of it that in the old days, several thousand years, including the last, until 2 or 10 or 20 years ago, things that were in the public domain had an editor of the New York Times, of Haaretz, of whatever, Le Monde. Now, in the web, there's no editor. See the language because of this. Think of it that in the old days, the press thought that it can influence. Now people say, if the press is against me, I'm going to win the election. And they win. It may be enough if you turn to everybody, not through the press, but directly. If you do it shallow in terms of contents, but very strong emotionally, not to the brains, but to the gut feeling, mainly against somebody, against the other, the foreigner, the Arab, the Jew, the Mexican, the whoever. And this is not something that is happening in one country. You see it all over the place. And the backlash or the pendulum tilting on that new direction can be seen in the fascist parties in Western Europe. Look at Marine Le Pen, Freiheitspartei in Austria, Alternative für Deutschland in Germany. See what happened in Sweden, the Cinque Stelle in Italy, and more and more. And I think that this is a new challenge for all of us. And the question is whether the press can find the new challenges and still serve as the marketplace of information and idea. We all were for multiplicity in sources of press, no government control, no need for license. But there was a way to know what the truth was, or what we thought the truth was. For most of us, there was no debate about the facts in most cases. I can never forget in 2016, when I was then lecturing at Harvard at that time, and I remember looking television, the campaign between Clinton and Trump. And I remember a lady called Conaway, Kellyanne Conway, when she was confronted with some questions, she said, I have alternative facts. I thought, what is that? Fake news, you say it's fake. Alternative facts. One says it's Sunday, another guy says it's Tuesday. It's alternative facts. Now, the multiplicity of sources and the fact that there's no Mount Sinai where Moses comes with the truth is good, because we don't like somebody to tell us, but where does it leave the people on the street if they can't know, they can't count? Those in the older days, until some years ago, people couldn't get there, in most cases, to the top leadership if they were not supported by what we call in German the Intelligentsia, the more intelligent people from right or left, endorsed by the New York Times or by Le Monde or by somebody, and bringing with him or with here people who are now studying at Harvard for the Democrats or Stanford at Hoover Institute for the Republicans or in the Hebrew University. You needed the smart people to run a country. You couldn't go without having the support of the what people now hate to call, but they call elites, the people who studied or were elected for there, but they know better. They can be left or right, religious, secular, but they have learned more. They have accumulated experience and wisdom. Now all these are an object of hatred and anger, and you can reach the top, not only if you don't have it, but because you don't have it, because you speak in a non-politically correct way, you talk this way, and you get there to the top. So this is a huge challenge, and democracy, which I want to say a few words on now, I don't want to take too long a time, is of course not, we know it, I don't need to explain it here, just the rule of majority. Of course it's the rule of majority on certain things. When we vote, we don't give the majority, or those who were elected to run the country in Knesset, in Congress or president, the power to do whatever they like. They can't, for example, even 120 members of the Knesset, they can't tell me you don't lay tefillin tomorrow morning. They don't have the right to, they were never elected to do that. They don't have a right to do that. Take from me what the Americans would call my inalienable rights. There are things they can do. They can go to war, they can raise taxes, very important things, but not everything. There is a limit. The theory of checks and balances is invented and developed for that. So one check and balances vehicle like this is, of course, the court system. And now it is under heavy attack in a very frightening way. Because in this country, those of you who live here know it, I remember all my life, there were fierce political debates. Relationship with Germany, Wiedergutmachung, yes or no, to take the money or not, land and peace and territories or socialism, capitalism, but there has not been a struggle over the basic values of rule of law, democracy, human rights. They all spoke in this language. This was discourse. In a way, the party that was more hawkish, people call it wrongly right-wing, the Likud party or the Sharut party, was the most significant defender of the court system and the idea of the rule of law. Begin used to call it the supremacy of law, Elionut HaMishpat, not even the rule of law. So there was no debate on this. So when you have debates, and we have them, it's good that we have them. In order to stay one society, you need a certain common agreed values and an agreement on the rules of the game. Now these values are under attack, not the other issues. Who needs the courts to defend whom? We were elected to run the country. Why do you tell us don't do this and don't do that? Now in Israel it's even more dangerous, because in Israel the court has been critical in developing Israeli democracy. Unfortunately, one of the big mistakes of David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister, was that he objected to a constitution. But in spite of that, a very courageous court, what they would call now activist imperialists, told him, you don't decide on your own on the balance between defense and freedom of the press. We decide. You don't close the paper. 1953. Authoritarian Ben-Gurion had to bow and said yes. And more. So the court is under heavy attack, the legal system. The court that has been agreed as a decent and accepted body is now under heavy attack because it wants to limit, and it does limit, the power of government and of the majority. The press is another institution, although not official, that does the same thing. It in a way limits the power because it publishes things, it tells the public things the government doesn't want to know. So the press is under attack. And the combinations that you hear now in our streets, in our radio and television, in the networks, that the press is all leftist. Leftist means almost traitor, and they influence the legal system to persecute a person. And this gets a high percentage of credibility, which was seen in last election. So we do have a challenge here when all the guardians of democracy, those who don't act just for the rule of majority, which is important, but limits the power, like the court, like the press, like the state controller, all these are under attack. So we need to see the attack on the press as in a bigger context, in a more important, in a way of great concern. It is the institution, like court or press, not only because their strength, and they are strong in a democratic society, but because of their values. The values that have developed in these institutions, including our legal system, include inevitably equality. Those who don't want to see equality, limiting the power of the government, equality between Jew and Arab, man and woman, gay and straight, and so forth, cannot live with that. So this is another attack. And you see it coming again and again. The other thing is liberty, the idea of freedom, that people have freedom, including freedom of speech, say annoying things, troubling things, and be able to contain them and listen to them is not given. It all, to me, has to do not with the human race, but with the issue of leadership. Unfortunately, people are not born good-hearted, I would say, although we would love to believe in it. It says in the book of Genesis, Noach, Parashat Noach, Yetzer lev ha'adam ra mino urav. People are not born good-hearted, they are born ill-hearted. People are born, if they want something, they will take it, why not? Here comes the leadership, if you like, Moses from Mount Sinai, or the leader says, lo tignov, lo tirtzach. It's not because people are born not to take, they want it, but there is culture, there is leadership that tells them there's things you don't do. Racism, you can hear and see it in many countries, in many peoples, because we like our own, and in times of stress, we hate the other. And if the leadership tells you, don't do this, racism is not us. Can I say it as a Jew? It's horrendous to hear people, Jews, speaking about foreigners like a cancer. We had the minister saying like this, saying this word. It's a leadership question. But the world of today that I mentioned earlier, where people are elected when they talk to the masses, so to speak, it's not that they tell the masses what is right. They look for what Minat Semach says the masses want to hear, and that's what they say. So in the absence of leadership, people inevitably will go under the lowest instincts. And you see it all over the world, not here. So I think that we see a major challenge to all of us and to democracy. And freedom of the press is not only the old freedom against the government either attacking, delegitimizing it, or trying to control it and to own it in doubtful ways, which may or may not go to trial, another question that is ahead of us. But I think that it is of great importance that press people themselves think of how they can solve, or at least try to cope with the new realities, not just what we said rightly, go back to the old paradigm of good press and decent press, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. There are new challenges, and new media, and new ways to influence, and new people that you need to influence. So the press, in a way, needs to reinvent itself to continue being essential to preserve democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan, for putting it in the context of democracy and under siege. We had yesterday a session or a workshop on smartphones, which reminded me to ask you to switch off your smartphones or to turn them into silent mode, okay? It will help us a lot. Linda Q is the fact-check reporter of the New York Times, based in Washington, D.C. She joined the Times in 2017, Previously, she was staff reporter at PolitiFact, the largest fact-checking outlet in the United States. Today in a workshop, she described how she is conducting her work. And today we asked her to tell us very briefly why fact-checking is so important, and more so today. So Linda, please.
All right, I can barely see you guys, but here we go. So I came across a recent phenomenon of an old phenomenon, actually. In the 1980s, in the midst of the HIV/AIDS crisis in America, an Indian newspaper that was affiliated with the Soviet Union published a report saying that the American government had created HIV/AIDS. This report got picked up first in gay newspapers in America, and it moved to black newspapers in America. And within the course of several years, it was repeated by presidential candidates. It got picked up by ABC World News, and it became so ubiquitous that in 2004, Kanye West had a song referencing this. He's a rapper, for those who don't know. So here's an old viral fake news and misinformation campaign started actually by KGB covert action units in America and in India that has such a long life. And yet it was neither particularly sophisticated nor was it particularly novel, but it illustrated two important things. Throw as much mud onto the walls and some of it will stick. And its aim was to divide and sow division in America already divided. Because at the time, the black community and the gay community had a lot of issues with the regime, or with the administration of President Reagan. So to them, this seemed like the truth. I'm a fact-check reporter for the New York Times. I don't have to deal with KGB disinformation campaigns anymore, but I do have to deal with viral disinformation. I have to deal with politicians who spin the facts, and my job makes me probably one of the least popular people in Washington. But it's still important. I vet the claims from politicians for their accuracy, and I deliver bite-sized vetting. I think of it as a politician is wearing a sweater, and I see there's a loose thread hanging on it, and I'm pulling, and I'm pulling, and I'm pulling, and maybe the sweater will disassemble, and the emperor is actually wearing no clothes at all. But that's what fact-checking is. It's focused, it's timely, and it's about the news, and it reveals small bits about what a politician is saying to be false or true. So imagine my surprise when in 2018, President Trump was speaking at a annual convention for veterans, something that's like a pretty regular political event that all presidents attend. He went on about America's military might, again, pretty standard, what he's doing for veterans, pretty standard, some stuff about tariffs and the trade war, whatever. And then he goes, just remember, pointing to the CNN cameras in the back, what you are seeing and what you're reading is not what's happening. Just stick with us. Don't believe the crap you see from these people, the fake news. The reaction? A mix of applause, but also boos and hisses. So that illustrates two things for me. There are bubbles that we won't be able to puncture, but there's still skeptics out in the world who don't believe the things that politicians say and believe us instead. So that makes me somewhat optimistic. The politicians may have Twitter megaphones and TV interviews and YouTube pages, and disinformation campaigns might have Twitter bots or fake Facebook pages that disseminate fake news to millions of people. And what we have on the side of us is the truth, and readers who are hungrier than ever for it. In America, a poll recently came out where the majority of Americans believe that journalists have a responsibility to fact-check the news. It's something that they crave, and you can fact-check me on those numbers as well. And at the New York Times, when I was hired in 2017, we saw a huge hunger after the 2016 presidential election for this sort of journalism content. Our fact checks are read, on nights like the State of the Union and presidential debates with views up to 2 or 3 million, within the space of 2 or 3 hours. So it's something that people really, really crave. And it's something that, isn't just a phenomenon on the right. In the United States, after me and a couple of other fact-checkers fact-checked the rising Democratic star Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she dismissed our work saying, being accurate might not be as important as being right. What does that even mean? But I think readers and Americans are catching on. The Washington Post fact checker, who's an esteemed colleague of mine, did a survey recently where he looked at 10 of President Trump's biggest falsehoods, the things that he repeats tens of times, hundreds of times, and asked readers what's true or not. And the vast majority of them were able to identify the lies that he was telling. And that's amazing because that means we're breaking through. It's happening. People trust us again. But, you might have heard the old adage, a lie travels around the world 3 times while the truth is putting on its shoes. And in this new age, I think we just got to get faster at tying our shoes. And with the power of the internet, the Twitter bots have it, but so do we. A couple of decades ago, it might have taken or weeks to verify something, going to the library. But with the power of the internet, I can find reports on crime in London. I can find things about 1960s mortgage rates in America with the click of a button, whereas before it would have taken years or weeks to verify those statements. So it's something that's available to us as journalists. And at the end of the day, I think about what my editor, Dean Baquet, always says. Our job as journalists isn't to oppose politicians, but to report on the truth without fear or favor and report it accurately. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. I encourage the next speakers to follow her example of being brief and focused. The next session is a panel titled From Watchdog of Democracy to the Enemy of the People. And I invite the panelists to join me on the stage as I read their short bios. Scott Kraft, managing editor of the Los Angeles Times, who joined the paper as a national correspondent in Chicago and was bureau chief in Nairobi, Johannesburg, and Paris. Pulitzer Prize finalist in feature writing, and he also was a Pulitzer juror in international reporting in 2014, chair of the public service jury in 2015. And please, come. And Scott came here courtesy, don't clap when I finish, okay? No, okay, I owe you some clapping. Okay. Scott came here courtesy of our friends from the New York-based Overseas Press Club of America, and thank you, Patricia and Bill, for facilitating it. Paula Slayer, Middle East correspondent of Russia Today, the ATV. Paula has worked in broadcasting for 25 years as a foreign correspondent, anchorwoman, and news editor, and has received numerous awards for her works. She can often be seen reporting from front lines of Syria, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Egypt, Gaza, Israel, and the Palestinian territory, and Lebanon. So, Paula, please. The clapping you get at the end. Magdalena Trigamonti is a Polish award-winning journalist who started her career at Newsweek Polish edition in 2002, and these days working with Dziennik, I hope I pronounce it right, Dziennik Gazeta Prawna, okay, DGP, one of the main, please join us, one of the main dailies in Poland. Magdalena and her husband Maximilian, who is also here, are the authors of many books, including The Echo, a photo book about the Volhynia massacre, which was awarded the Photography Book of the Year 2018 in Pictures. And by the way, on Thursday at 11 o'clock at our at the press club, Magdalena and Maximilian will talk about the book. So anybody who wants to come and listen is kindly invited, but you need to RSVP either online or talk to Raya Koval, who's sitting here smiling and now laughing. David Horowitz is the founding editor of the Times of Israel, the Jewish world's leading current affair website with 30 million monthly page views. Linda, we need you to fact check this. The Time, no disrespect. The Times of Israel also publishes in French, Arabic, and Persian, and has just launched its Hebrew site, Zman Israel. Horowitz was previously editor-in-chief of Jerusalem Post and has written from Israel for newspapers around the world, including New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Irish Times, and others. And last but not least, Yair Tarchitsky, chairman of the Union of Journalists in Israel, has written and edited for prominent Israeli media outlets, including Marido, Haaretz, Yediot, and others. And he also served as a member of the Directorate of the Israel Press Council. We will have 2 rounds here. In the first round, I'll ask each and every one of you to say whether or not the situation in your country fits the title of this conference, Journalism Under Siege, and more specifically, the title of this session, From Watchdog of Democracy to the Enemy of the People. Because of the brevity of the time, I'd be happy if you answer in yes or no. No, I'm joking, but I implore you to be brief and focused. In the second round, I'll ask you about responsibility, whether or not the press has to do some soul searching itself, and if so, what it can do to alleviate the situation. But first, as an appetizer, I would like to show you some clips about press freedom in the 4 countries here. The first from Israel is in Hebrew, so I'll tell you it shows Prime Minister Netanyahu blaming the left and the media, which to him is the same, for scheming together a coup against him. In the second, this is in English, but still President Trump praises Greg Gianforte, the Congress member from Montana, for violently attacking a Guardian reporter. The last 2 clips from Russia and Poland speak for themselves. So please.
כיוון שגם השמאל וגם התקשורת, וזה אותו הדבר, יודעים זאת, מכיוון שהם יודעים זאת, אז הם מתגייסים כעת למסע ציד אובססיבי חסר תקדים נגדי ונגד משפחתי במטרה לבצע הפיכה שלטונית.
Endorsed Greg very early, but I had heard that he body slammed a reporter. And he was way up. And he was way up, and I said, oh, this was like the day of the election or just before. And I said, oh, this is terrible. He's going to lose the election. Then I said, well, wait a minute. I know Montana pretty well. I think it might help him. And it did.
The headlines read, "We are Ivan Golunov." Russia's 3 major newspapers have united in a rare act of defiance. In a joint editorial this morning, they expressed their alarm at the detention of prominent investigative journalist Ivan Golunov, arrested on drug-dealing charges last Thursday. Since his arrest, his colleagues and other journalists have been protesting outside the headquarters of the Moscow police. Several were detained but released later without charge.
В Москве задержан наш коллега, журналист Иван Голунов.
And in an unexpected move, even on this pro-Kremlin TV network, one of the anchors described Golunov as her colleague, calling for transparency and saying this case is now a truth test for Russia.
I came to work in the newsroom, but sitting at my computer was somebody else who was supposed to go on air for me. The director said he liked and valued me, but unfortunately I didn't fit into the new concept.
Ale niestety koncepcja się zmieniła i nie pasuje już do nowej koncepcji.
The new concept was largely the government line. From one moment to the next, she and over 200 co-workers had been replaced by broadcast journalists close to the ruling party. The government labelled the measure the minor media bill.
It was a very touching moment for me to see all the people take to the streets in protest against it. To know that people didn't want propaganda. And they knew very well that this bill would make Polish television the mouthpiece of the government.
Okay, so it's just an appetizer. myself. So, Scott, let's start with you. Anybody heard Scott yesterday? Yeah. Okay, so
I can't repeat anything.
no. Especially not the jokes. So, okay, so let's start with you, Scott. In short, is media in America under siege?
Well, I think it is, but to the second part of that question about the title of our session this evening, I think it's actually a little more complicated than that. I do think that there is perception of the media, and then there is what the media is really doing, what we're really doing. And when I think about watchdog journalism, which some people call accountability journalism, investigative journalism, that's how I think of it. It's not advocacy journalism. When I think about that, I think that continues to be a key role we play. And it's interesting that when we think about government versus the media, that has always been so. I mean, government officials don't really like the media, although they have in the past felt that they had to rely on us to get their message out, which is, as several speakers have said this evening, is no longer the case. But in some cases, at least for local governments, we're actually the only people listening to them. So they have a tough balancing act, I think, to really completely ignore us. And I do think it's important to remember that the people in charge and the people people highlighted up here on those clips are not necessarily, they don't necessarily even have a majority of support in their own countries. And in some cases, they don't. And so it's important for us not to lose sight of the fact that a lot of people are looking to us to do the kind of accountability reporting that is important and that will tell them what their government's doing. On the other hand, we also have a responsibility to tell people what the government is doing when it's doing a good job, too, and perhaps we don't do that as often as we should.
So we'll talk about it maybe in the next round. Paula, there was a kibbutz member when the kibbutz still was a kibbutz who, in a members' meeting, said, "Friends, before I start speaking, I want to say something." So before you start speaking, I want you to say something about the two criticisms leveled at Russia Today frequently. One, that in fact Russia Today is not an independent free media organization, but an organ of the Russian government. And two, that Russia Today sometimes uses methods which don't conform to the professional and ethical rules of journalism. We need to clear the table before we start speaking, okay?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. As I was listening to you, it reminded me when I went for my job interview with Russia Today. As you can hear from my accent, I'm not Russian, I'm South African. And I was thinking, hell, how am I going to convince them that I deserve to get a job with Russian television? And growing up in South Africa, I had no connection to Russia except a Russian grandmother. And I said to them, my grandmother comes from Russia, thinking that would get me the job. And they said, everybody has a grandmother who comes from Russia. It's not going to help you. It is true. Russia Today was set up some 13 years ago. We're Russian television in English, and we are criticized for being the Kremlin mouthpiece. We receive our budget from the government. And it raises a really interesting conversation, because if I was sitting here and I was telling you that I was from the BBC and we got our budget from the British government, or if I told you I work for Deutsche Welle and we get our budget from the German government, would you level the same criticism at me and accuse me of being the mouthpiece for the government? And I enjoy the conversation, and I hope we'll have time to hear your questions. But what I always struggle with is this whole question of what is propaganda. I spent 1.5 years reporting in eastern Ukraine for Russia Today, where everybody supported Russia's actions in eastern Ukraine. They never called me a propaganda channel. In fact, everywhere I went, people said, finally, we have people who tell the truth. I am not allowed into Kiev. The last time I went to Kiev, my passport was stamped, I was detained and I was deported. For 5 years, I can't go back. And what they put on my passport was that I am a weapon of war, that Russia uses its media as instruments of warfare against Ukraine. So the questions I level are, what is
the eye of the beholder.
Exactly. Propaganda is, one person's propaganda is another person's truth. And so you're welcome to your own opinion, and many people don't like us, and that's fair enough. But the one thing I will defend Russia Today on is it's called Russia Today. It is the Russian point of news. Russia Today never presents itself as an objective viewpoint, saying we are the be-all and end-all of the news. But Russia Today is the Russian perspective. If you want to know what the Russians are thinking on something, then you watch Russia Today. If you don't, go to another channel.
What about the second part of criticism?
Can you repeat what you said, that we are perceived?
That Columbia School of Journalism, for example, ran a survey on methods of Russia Today, found them like using, I don't want to go too much into it, but using experts who are not experts, quoting unchecked facts, etc., in order to support a certain line.
I'm based in Israel. I can't speak for every single correspondent who works for the channel. I can say that my exposure with the channel, which is since before its inception, so it's some 14 years, is that we do check our facts. Now, the question of who do we use as experts is an interesting conversation, because why was Russia Today set up? It was set up because the Russian government feels that people like you and me who don't speak Russian, who speak English, perhaps we don't understand the Russian perspective. Let's hear the Russian perspective in our first language. Because every time we're hearing what Russia thinks of something, it's coming through the mainstream press and it's being filtered and subjected. So if you're criticizing the views we use and the people we access, maybe that's a valid criticism, but the criticism back is the whole point of Russia Today is to take away from the same viewpoints, the same mainstream media, the same echo chamber. Let's bring in different points of view. Let's access different people and different experts. Who's to say that an expert at Washington University is any more legitimate than an expert from somebody else in the world?
As somebody said, I don't know if President Putin himself or somebody on behalf of him, that Russia Today is about challenging the hegemony of the Anglo-Saxon interpretation of what's going on in the world. Would you?
I would agree with that, and just to make the conversation broader for everybody, it doesn't just have to be about Russia Today. You know, we were the first channel that was a government channel in different languages. Russia Today is in Arabic, it's in French, it's in Spanish, it's in German. Today you get French television that's in English and a whole range of different languages. You get Chinese television in English and French and all those languages. So I think there's a real effort today to diversify the news platforms into different languages so that you don't have this echo chamber and this one mainstream viewpoint going across.
Okay. So now we solved that. Okay. So wait. Hold the mic for a second. Situation in Russia today.
So I'm not based in Russia. I can tell you, and I did. The figures are that Russia's 149th out of 128 on the World Press Freedom Survey. So it's pretty bad when it comes to press freedom. And those are figures from Reporters Without Borders. Since 1991, more than 300 journalists in Russia have been arrested or detained or killed. So the figures coming out of Russia are not good. At the same time, if you will give me one more moment just to elaborate on that.
I will.
I wanted to make a point that people don't really think about. After having spent a year and a half in the Ukraine for a Russian television channel, I am labeled a propagandist, and I'm labeled not a journalist by the Ukrainians. There was a witch hunt against me where my life was threatened and I had to be brought out of Ukraine. This is a separate incident. So I'm not trying to whitewash what's going on in Russia, but I am trying to say the flip side that people often don't notice is also true. Journalists who choose to work for a government channel should not have to apologize for working for a government channel. And the confusion about Trump, you mentioned this yesterday, talking about fake news. It's not just that he talks about fake news. He makes it really dangerous for journalists like myself who work in dangerous environments where a person comes up and says, you're a propagandist, you do fake news, And with a weirdo, that can lend itself into some kind of physical attack.
Thank you, and I'll let you respond to each other briefly if you want later. Magdalena, Poland.
Hello, thank you.
Like in the Eurovision, we were switching from country.
France, 1.3, yes, no.
1 point on?
No. Thank you for invitation. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Uri. I'm from Poland, Warsaw. I'm a journalist. I'm a member of Press Club in Warsaw. And we have also public television with governmental budget. It's not a journalism, it's a propaganda, absolutely. I know, I'm sure there are not journalists, there are media workers only. And we know a lot of colleagues who work in public television in Poland, and we have a problem with their work, their responsibility, and with everything, with their journalism. But Yuri, if you want me, I return to the word siege, because I remember the moment when politicians in Poland were under siege. Not journalism was under siege. It was 2.5 years ago when Speaker of our parliament wanted to close our parliament for journalists. And Jarosław Włodarczyk, who sits over there, organized protest. It was incredible because every magazines, every media in Poland united in this protest, and we won. Now we have a place in the parliament, and we can ask politicians about everything. It's a kind of freedom
but there's a small media policy or minor media policy which is going on. Maybe Jaroslav, later in the Q&A you'll say a few words about it, if you will.
But,
okay.
I would like to tell you, yesterday when I was listening to the debate of Israeli journalists about media in Israel, I thought, oh my God, it is the same like in Poland. The same. We are in the war.
We all have Polish mothers.
We are in the war, we are in the fight, and we have two groups of media. One of them is propaganda, public television, and few magazines, newspapers, which support government, and second part which support opposition. And huge group of journalists like me who are in the middle between. It's kind of a big hole. It's like in the wall. I don't know how to say when you dig something. Yeah, and we are in very, very difficult situation, because I would like interview with everybody, every politicians in Poland, every politician, and I know that they afraid of real journalism. They're afraid of difficult questions. They're afraid about me too. Yes, this is situation in Poland.
Thank you. On this happy note, we switch to Israel, and we hear the representatives of one news organization and one union of journalists. So David, please.
Sure. Just tell me, how many of you are Israeli? Just raise your hands, because probably you'll know. Okay, so there's not much that I'm going to tell you that you don't know. We saw it in the clip there. You have a prime minister who equates his opposition and the media by definition being left, the Bolshevik media, part of a plot, a witch hunt to bring him down. Obviously, it's inconvenient for him. One of our responsibilities in independent journalism is to expose corruption. We don't all have time to run our country ourselves. We elect people to do it, and we, citizens in a democracy, rely on a free press to expose corruption. And when free press exposes corruption and it leads allegedly all the way to the prime minister, he rails against it and tries to discredit the media, and that's what's playing out here. You're all familiar with this, but just internalize that all three of the cases against Netanyahu have a media element. In some cases, a central media element. 1,000, 2,000, and 4,000. 1,000 because Milchan was somewhere in the mix with our two independent television stations. 2,000 because, of course, what was at stake there was an effort to reorient the editorial line of the country's biggest selling newspaper and biggest website. And 4,000, again, please read the charge sheet if you haven't already, and realize that Netanyahu essentially was the editor-in-chief of Walla, which is the second biggest news site in Israel, on election day in 2015. Remember when Netanyahu evaded election law because he wasn't able to have his the Arabs are being bussed to the polls in droves speech broadcast in conventional media. He put it up on Facebook, right? You know that. But in the chart sheet, you will also find that it stayed very, very high on the homepage of the Walla news site for hours on election day as well. Okay, so understand that at the heart of the allegations against Netanyahu are attempts to gain extraordinary control over media. The biggest two websites, he already has the most read newspaper, the biggest selling newspaper. I could go on. The state broadcaster was taken apart, in part because it was troubling for him. I don't think it came back together in the way that he wanted, and I would watch that space as well. So I think it's terribly, terribly serious. And of course, we're in a situation, as you talk about as well, politicians, they know they can reach the people without the awkward necessity of facing difficult questions from genuine independent media that want to ask them awkward questions. And by the way, they can even set up their own, like he did in the run-up to the election just now. You had Likud TV. Why do you need to speak to all the other broadcasters, which, by the way, nonetheless piped everything into everyone's living room whenever he did want to speak to the nation? But, there's a great deal around the Netanyahu corruption allegations that centers on the media and his efforts to ensure that the media is not a problem for him. I think that's incredibly serious. We have the problems, that are globally afflicting media in Israel. The economic model was broken, of course, and that means media becomes increasingly sensationalist. We're in that impossible contradiction between being fast and accurate. You can't be both, but if you're not fast, you're irrelevant. It's very, very difficult. I could speak for a long time. I'm going to be very, very, I'll try and sum up briefly now. I don't think it's a lost cause. I appreciate what the New York Times fact checker said about, I think people do, not everybody, but a lot of people do return to credible media. The Times of Israel, I don't really want to schwitz too much, although I'm very...
But go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm very proud of what we did. In 7 years from nowhere, we became a website with 5 million unique users last month, 30 million page views in each of the last 2 months. I can't tell you if you go and check what will be this month, but those are the figures. If we only wrote about sex, household pets, and archaeology, okay, those are the three big ones, folks, we would have more traffic. And we had a story, there was an Israel Museum exhibit a few years ago about plaster wall hangings from ancient Mesopotamia, which included sex, household pets, and archaeology. That was a very successful article. But we get traffic for very serious stuff as well, including pieces that are very long and very nuanced, including, for example, a very serious piece about Case 4000, which explained some of the sort of media focus that I set out to you very quickly. So I don't think it's a lost cause, but we're definitely under siege.
Thank you. Yesterday we mentioned the fact that precisely now the New York Times has gained more online subscribers, and you guys also are doing well. So probably there's a backlash to the siege, or at least some optimistic ray of hope here. Yair, you told me you have two challenges in this conference. One is to wear a suit, and the second is to speak English.
But to speak English after David with his perfect English and really brilliant things he said. It's
but no, but I would love you to say something about the state of the Israeli journalists. I mean, because you're representing them and suing publishers for them. So tell us from that angle what's going on.
Before this, I want to say a few words.
Like a politician. This is not a question.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I'm blushing. No, I want to say before a few words about Professor Moshe Negbi. That was, first he was my teacher, and I admired him like, I don't know, young kids in Israel admire Omer Adam in the Hebrew University. And but as you...
It's a big singer here.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. He was the Kanye West of the teachers in the university. And as you say in Hebrew, you have teachers for life, and he was the exact definition for a teacher for life. He was more as a mentor. I think that from the minute we thought about establishing the Union of Journalists in the end of 2011, he was one of the first persons we went and asked for his opinion, if it's the right thing to do, if it's the right thing to do it in this route. And from that point, he was our mentor in every big process we were doing about freedom of press, and he always helped, and he always was really modest and really intelligent, and we miss him. Not only me as a person, I think that all the Israeli journalists miss him as a person and his knowledge. He wrote at 2011, I think, that the big threat about journalists in the freedom of press in Israel moved from the government to the tycoons and the big publishers and the big money. I think he was right for that time, but I think something changed, and I think that the big threat, I don't want to say that it returned to the government, because it's like a complex mix.
Wait, the tycoons are the government, no?
I think that the relationship between the tycoons and the government became the big threat. And I think that maybe I see another teacher of mine, Rafi Man, that he is an expert for the old media in Israel and its relationship with the government. But I think that maybe 40 years ago, when they talked about the government that is a big threat, it was like some kind of tense between politicians that are thinking what's good for Israel and thinking about security issues. And now I don't feel that the relationship between the media and the politicians, it's about what's good for Israel. A more liberal point of view, or think more about security. It becomes about only interests. And I think this is the big threat, this relationship. And I think that most of the people are Israelis, so I don't need to tell them. But I think that this relationship is not only the big threat about journalism in Israel, it's maybe one of the main issues that determines the Israeli politics. A government in Israel at 2015 fell down because of a media outlet, because of a newspaper, Israel Hayom. At 2017, the other government almost fell down because of the public broadcast in Israel. And I don't think it happened because the politicians thought about what's good for Israel. Which type of public broadcast. They didn't care about the public broadcast, and they didn't care about the journalists of the public broadcast. And I think, and now I will answer your question.
Very briefly, very briefly.
That I think that one of the biggest threats was the really weak status of journalists in Israel. And I think it started to change. I think that after decades that the journalists in Israel weren't unionized, and when I'm saying unionized, I don't... To have a strong union, it's not just about getting better salaries and better pension. I think one of the most important things is that we, as the journalists, will have the power to give a fight back to the publishers, fight the interests that are trying to stop us from serving the public. And I think since we unionized, we did a lot of change in these issues. One of them, and I will say only one, is that in the collective agreements in a lot of media outlets in Israel, in Walla, that David talked about it before, we put a chapter that talks about ethics. If a journalist now in Walla would experience what he experienced a few years ago, and he wants to say, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not taking down this article about Sarah Netanyahu because it's not non-ethical. By the collective agreement, it's forbidden to fire him. And I think it's a beginning of a change, and I hope...
Wonderful. Thank you. So the next round is about responsibility. Does the press need to do some soul-searching? Maybe some of the blame is inside. Scott, why don't you start? And we just, as we speak, the New York Times says no cartoons anymore. So this is the way to fix the problem?
I can't. Oh, sorry. Yes, I can't comment on that. Maybe can. She will not.
Why can't you?
I would say that, well, for one thing, the policy of our editorial pages in America is separate from the journalism part. But to answer your bigger question, I think that, first of all, I think our role is not to present the views of the government, and it's not necessarily to praise or criticize the government. Our role really is to report as thoroughly as we can, as honestly as we can, and as fairly as we can. Now, do we do that all the time perfectly? Of course not. I mean, we are in a constant state of self-reflection, I would say, about issues like that.
But Walter Cronkite was mentioned here, and he spoke for Middle America. Do you today speak for many Americans that seem to have lost them, or you don't reach out to them?
I think that, well, first of all, America is a very different place than it was in Walter Cronkite's time, and that is important. I think America was looking for a different kind of journalism then, particularly in television journalism. I think today it is true that, well, let's take the 2016 election is a good example. I mean, we didn't cover ourselves in glory in covering that because we, as the media generally, I think, missed what was going on in the country, missed something really important that was going on in the country. So,
like the British media missed Brexit.
Exactly. And so that actually did lead to a lot of self-reflection among all of us in journalism. And I think we're approaching the 2020 election in a very different way now because we know that we missed a kind of anger in the country. We were too beholden to political opinion polls, which often heavily weighted people who were voters, had voted in the past, and were likely to vote. Turned out in that election, a lot of people who had not voted in a long time voted. So I think, and of course we probably have long over-relied on political opinion polls in order to do predictive kind of reporting, which we probably shouldn't be doing anyway. So I think we've learned a lesson there. I think also it's really important I mean, sometimes it's hard for readers and listeners and viewers to understand that we are not. It's not really our position that. Well, first of all, we're constantly critical of everybody. I mean, we were incredibly critical of President Clinton. We were critical of President H.W. Bush. We were critical of President George W. Bush. We were critical of President Obama, and his administration really didn't like us for that, for the critical things we wrote about them. So that a little bit comes with the territory. And I think over time, readers understand that. But it's hard in the moment because it looks like we're always writing things that are, and I say critical, I really mean doing reporting that puts government officials who are currently in power in a bad light. And that's our job, actually, is to try to get to the bottom of what is really happening. And our job isn't to be a mouthpiece for them. On the other hand, it's not to, we shouldn't ignore, especially local, county, state officials, when they are taking steps to solve real problems in our communities, homelessness and crime and other things like that. We should not be afraid to report positively about that as well.
Thank you. Paula.
I mean, while I'm listening, I have a question formulating, and that is, if a journalist supports the government, does the person cease to be a journalist? Because, I mean, Magdalena, the way you presented it was you said, well, you have in your country those who oppose the government, you have those in the middle, and you have propagandists. So I'm just putting it out there. I mean, just because a journalist supports the government, and I'm not talking blind, devotee, whatever, but, you know, you're a journalist, you adhere to the principles of journalism, but you support the government, do you cease to be a journalist? And the argument would be no. To follow on from what you're saying, Brexit was missed. At the same time, the election of Donald Trump was missed because we are using, to quote your question from earlier, the same voices, the same sources, the same echo chamber. We report the same stories over and over again. And again, you might not like Russia today, and fair enough, but you have to admit that there is a need out there for a diversity of views. And I think one of the ways we can fight fake news, and I think one of the reasons we have fake news is because people have lost trust in the mainstream media that they're being fed, and they potentially open to other sources. If we diversify our news, I think we can try fight fake news by presenting people with reliable journalism that's not fake news, but that stops them from searching for alternative views. And I just want to make one comment to David. I know, I mean, the Times of Israel, your reputation precedes you, and I know you say you have all these unique viewers, but we have the same thing at Russia Today. We were the first channel to hit 1 billion views on YouTube. Today, we have 5 billion views on our YouTube channel, so that's quite tremendous in terms of figures. But it begs the question, and something I struggle with is, are we actually changing people's views out there? And I think we have so many different media outlets today that people almost find an outlet that they agree with. Who comes and listens to Russia Today are probably people who are sensitive to Russia Today's point of view to begin with, and we kind of just echo back and give people the confidence that what they believe is what they believe. So I'm not sure that figures is anything to go by, because it doesn't necessarily mean that our news is being read or watched or digested across the spectrum. It might just be people who would have followed our news anyway.
Okay, thank you. Magdalena.
Every single news is consulted with government is propaganda for me, not only for me. And
I put you together just by chance.
Yes.
No, I didn't mean to provoke it, but go on.
This is my point of view, and I think it's a journalistic point of view. And I forgot about it.
So in the meantime, I'll tell you what Kennedy said. Kennedy said, Kennedy said, if the Republicans stop telling lies about us, we'll stop telling the truth about them. So it depends where you stand. Where you stand is where you sit.
And responsibility for me is asking, and once again asking politicians of everything. Yes, and I would like to tell a short story about my interview with Vice Prime Minister Piotr Gliński. He's also Minister of Culture in our government. And after a very long and very difficult interview, it was like ping pong, and every question was difficult for him and also for me. And after that, in the end of the interview, he asking me, "Are you happy?" And I said, "Yes, I am. Thank you." And he said, "If you more happy, I more unhappy." And it is journalism. And I suppose, and I believe that he understands journalism, or he pretends. I don't know. But I know that our government, there are more than one politicians who would like to answer to difficult questions. And
in our country, he just avoids the question. He speaks directly to the people.
Uri, I said about
Trump tweets.
I said about a speaker of our parliament. Only one conference was. Oh no. We are waiting for conference. 4 years. 4 years, yes. And I'm waiting for interview with Minister of Justice, Zbigniew Ziobro, too. And I'm waiting for interview with our President Andrzej Duda, but 2 weeks ago they promised me that in the end of June will be interview Magdalena Rigamonti and
let us know if it happens.
And Andrzej Duda.
Okay, thank you. David, are you perfect, or excuse me, sir, my dear friend Yaroslav. David, are you perfect, or there's a room for improvement?
Well, yeah, we're not perfect. We do try to relay facts and attempt honest reportage, and I use those words because the Columbia Journalism School critique of Russia Today that you mentioned, Uri, wrote that RT ignores the inherent traits of journalism, checking sources, relaying facts, attempting honest reportage. Just, I was a little uneasy to be on a platform on this subject with somebody who seems to be running a site that, the way ex-minister Marido put it, quoting Kellyanne Conway, has alternative facts. I don't think page views are the only barometer of anything, by the way. It just means lots of people read your content, and there are easy ways to get very high page views. But I think, if journalism that does try to relay facts and check them and give people a fair sense of what's going on, if journalism like that gets lots of page views, that's something pretty praiseworthy. The Times of Israel tries to do that, and we also have a spectacularly diverse blog platform where really opinions across the spectrum. We are castigated all the time by left and right in Israel and the Jewish world, which I take as a necessary but not sufficient condition. In other words, if I wasn't being castigated by both sides, I'd know that there was something really wrong. Being castigated by both sides doesn't necessarily prove that we're doing a good job, but I find it encouraging. In terms of problems that we have and Hebrew media, Israeli media have, we're not perfect. I think there's a little bit too much sycophancy. Coming back to Netanyahu, by the way, for whom I have some praise and some criticism. I don't think everything he does is right. I don't think everything he does is wrong. But he doesn't give interviews on the whole to people who are going to ask him nasty questions. He only gives interviews in the very last days of a campaign. And it's staggering to me the degree to which Hebrew media, I can think of lots of impolite metaphors for what they do when he
Like
deigns
what?
to. Well, I don't want to sully the room with them, but people are radically open to letting him say whatever he wants to say because they're so grateful that he's deigning to talk to them in the last few days of the campaign. I think that's very unfortunate. I also think, Scott, I think you'd be surprised by some of this because I think Hebrew media is worse than some media in other democratic countries in terms of items turning up that don't really belong there, and that if you start digging are only there because they're there because the owner or some other influential person wants them to be there, or even because certain money has changed hands, and they're not always clearly marked as sponsored or promoted content. So I think there's some skewing of what ought to be an independent and objective agenda, even in newspaper and website outlets that are generally relatively objective. So I think that's problematic. I think there's a bit too much of a sheep mentality in Israeli journalism. I'm not saying we're not guilty of that as well, by the way. But we spent a couple of years at the Times of Israel exposing something called binary options, which was a multi-billion-dollar fraud that went on for a decade. And to this day, Uri, it is inexplicable to me why it took the Times of Israel to expose it. People were being defrauded at colossal levels all over the world. We got the industry banned through the Knesset eventually. When they were having the committee meetings, and a police officer was there talking about the connections between this massive fraud and organized crime. It was so incredibly dramatic. And we had somebody from Skype from the United States talking about how his father had been pushed to suicide because he'd been ripped off by an Israeli binary options company. I think there were 2 or 3 Hebrew journalists who came to those committee sessions, and they basically sent out press releases, please come to this. At one point, Netanyahu said, we're going to have to close this whole thing down. It should be closed down worldwide. There were thousands of Israelis working in binary options. In other words, the prime minister was basically calling for thousands of people in Israel to be put out of work. It was barely reported. And either there was a sinister reason why it wasn't being reported, because of advertising links between much of Hebrew media and this industry, or I don't know what. So I find that pretty troubling. It's one of the reasons why we started a Hebrew site recently. Because we wanted to do some independent journalism in Hebrew. And the 2 last things I want to say very quickly. First of all, many of you in the room are journalists, and many of you are aware of this, but I'm telling you this because I wasn't. I wrote a piece a few months ago, and the headline began with the words fake news, and it said something about Avigdor Lieberman is a spy, Yair Netanyahu is a Christian, and it explained how seemingly credible stories can enter the mainstream because of some of the pretty sophisticated, pretty obvious when you know about them, ghosting of websites, replicating of what look like honest websites, and then faking content and then tweeting about the content. It's just an astounding world that we're grappling with when we try to do decent journalism. And the very last thing that I want to say, because I really care about this, and it's kind of why I'm on this panel, and I think it's why most of us are here, I think journalism is an essential and noble profession. I think if independent journalism collapses, democracies go down with it. And one of the big issues that I have, unfortunately, is there aren't enough good people going into journalism. PR is much better paid. Most other professions, or many other professions, are much better paid. But I really believe in it. I think it's essential, and I wish more good people were going into it. And that's a real problem for us.
Thank you. I think Yair has a solution for that with his union, so let's hear about that.
I have solutions for all the problems in the world. Not good solutions, but solutions. I think, of course, that we, as the journalists, we are responsible. I'm not sure that it's our fault, but we are responsible for it. I think that one of the biggest problems is that most of the journalists think about themselves as content creators and not as journalists. Today you work as a news editor in a website, and tomorrow you will be in a PR company or in other things, or do reality in television. And I think it's one of the biggest problems, because you take the ethos out of the journalism and stay only with the content. And when you are only responsible for the content and not for serving the public, it's a big problem. And I think that the public I think that the decline in the public trust in the media, it's not because the public doesn't understand, the people doesn't understand, it's because they understand pretty well that the journalism, most of the journalism, doesn't serve them anymore. And I think it's, of course, not only our responsibility as the journalists, I think it's a problem in the model, where the media and the press had a lot of profit, so everything was okay, or a lot of places were okay, but when there isn't any money, so you start with native advertisement, and a lot of tycoons that don't really want to earn money, they have other interest in the media, enters to the field, a lot of problems come, and the public understand it, and it's good that it understand it, but now we need to create an alternative and return to journalism that serves the public and not.
Thank you. I promised a rebuttal or the right of the last word. So, Paula.
David, I'm only saying this because it was quite insulting what you said about sitting on a panel with Russia Today. You've known me for 10 years. You knew me before I joined Russia Today. And when you were still editor of the Jerusalem Post, it was okay to publish my articles. You ran a whole features of mine from Lebanon, a front page spread where you told me my reporting was excellent. That was okay. But now, just because it's the same journalist working for a different channel, it doesn't count. And the other thing I wanted to say was you talk about your blogs being right across the political spectrum. Well, when I wrote to your editor of blogs offering to give a point of view that actually many people do support, she told me quite frankly, we don't want anybody from Russia Today writing for this newspaper. So I don't quite see how your blog page can represent all points of view.
Okay, so I don't want to go too deeply into this, and we can talk afterwards.
You'll
with pleasure.
continue later outside.
Absolutely. But the point is, it's not because of you, the journalist. It's because of the platform where you work. And my criticism is not directed against you personally.
I'm not. Can I just say one thing? I'm not taking it personally. I completely understand the problems, and this is the conversation we need to have as journalists.
Exactly.
All I'm presenting out there is that there are people who really agree with a channel like Russia Today. By refusing to engage with us and hear our point of views, you're doing a disservice to the people who watch us and to the industry as a whole.
Guys, I take the prerogative of the chairman to hold in suspense, okay? Because probably they get at each other's throat outside. Guys,
I'm sure we'll be incredibly polite outside.
Yeah,
that's
he's British
fine.
and I'm South African. This is the
South African and the British guy from Hendon, right?
Yes,
Okay,
it's true. How
guys,
do you know I'm from Hendon?
No?
Yes, it's true.
Yeah, the most polite people in England. I want to thank Yair, David, Magdalena, Paula, Scott. Thank you for your patience and stamina, and thank you very much. And now we have the no questions, because no questions. You know, you got a lot here. It's my sorry. It's my privilege, Benny, Zoen. It's my privilege to, guys, clear this commotion over there. It's my pleasure to invite to the stage, as I speak, two distinguished journalists, Oren Nahari, who's been founding father of many of the leading programs of public broadcasting in Israel, especially those focusing on foreign affairs, and Joseph Federman, who's the bureau chief of AP, please, in Jerusalem. He's been here as an editor first, and then took over, I think, in 2014. And these two gentlemen will speak with each other one-on-one on a very important issue of covering Israel, both from within and from the outside. So Owen and Joe, please.
Of all the PR photos in all the world, you had to pick up this one? Okay. So, Joe, hello. This is the part where we are trying to converse as if we are only here and nobody's out there, and we'll do it lightly, but we'll do our best. First of all, in covering Israel, we want to be loved. We want the world to say how wonderful we are. We are a great democracy. We don't have any problems in the world. Please show only Eurovision and everything else, and forget about other things. And if it doesn't come that way, then all hell breaks loose. Or am I exaggerating?
Well, this is the first time we've met. I feel like I'm on a blind date or something here.
I hope your blind dates were better than that. More romantic, anyhow.
Yes, I'm a little bit nervous here. I hope I make a good impression on you. Yeah, Israel.
We are in audition.
Yes. Israel is a country with a bit of an inferiority complex, and I always say, you know, people love to beat on the foreign media. They think the foreign media is anti-Israel, and one of the first things I always point out is that the Israeli media is far nastier, far more critical toward the country than the foreign media. Yet there's this sense that if you keep it in-house...
Not in front of the children. It's okay if we tell ourselves who we are. You cannot tell about us anything.
Exactly. And, you know, I was... this reminds me of a story. I've had several versions of this story happen to me over the years, but recently I was at the doctor having kind of a serious conversation about my health and a somewhat invasive procedure. And at the end of it all, he said, as I walked out, I thanked him. He said, "Hey, listen. Make sure you write nice things about us." And I get that all the time. Israelis are obsessed with how they are depicted in the foreign media.
And, of course, there's no such thing as media. The media, this all-groping monster. We know in Israel alone that when we are talking about media, so they're always thinking about the great liberal media, let's say, New York Times and the Washington Post in the States, and in Israel you talk about media, then again Yediot Acharonot, Haaretz, etc. But you're coming from abroad, you have Chinese media, you have Russian, as we've seen only now, you have print, digital, TV, radio, you have evangelists, you have Al Jazeera, all kinds. When you come to Israeli establishment, or you come to other places, you're representing the media. How do you react to that, to this all-encompassing sort of having to represent everybody?
Exactly. I mean, that's one of the first myths that you have to deal with. I just wrapped up my 5th term. I'm no longer doing it, but I did 5 terms as the chairman of the Foreign Press Association here. So representing somewhere between 400 and 500 journalists working for international media. And you pointed out some of the differences. It's such a diverse group of people, you cannot just talk about the foreign media. The foreign media is against us. Because like you say, you have everything from Al Jazeera to Russia Today to the Christian Broadcast Network. And that's just the different organizations. If anybody came into the AP newsroom, you'd see the diversity just within one organization, where we have not only Israelis and Palestinians, we have Europeans on our staff, we have Americans, we have Canadians, we have a couple from the Balkans, we have our photo chief is from Serbia. We have such a diverse group of people, and every story we cover, there's a discussion, a very animated discussion a lot of times. So to paint the foreign media with a broad brush is just missing the point.
And it's not just that. Let's put the spotlight for a minute on the foreign media. Sitting here, the only person I used to call boss, Mr. Yair Stern, great man. During the times, 25, 30 years ago, even IBA had a correspondent in Europe, a correspondent in Washington, a correspondent in Moscow right after the Berlin Wall fell, etc., etc. There were the days, the glory days of Bob Simon here and all the bureaus around the world, mostly Europe. But that's another problem. And these days, no such foreign media. There's no reporters on the ground covering a country as it should be covered.
this is a global trend. Again, I can talk about my own experience. I've been based here longer than most. I've been here for over 15 years. When I came here, the AP had roughly 100 people on staff, covering 3 territories: Israel, West Bank, Gaza. We have 3 formats. We have a TV department. We have stills photographers. We have writers. When you add it in TV producers, when you add everything up, we had about 100 people. Today, we're in, I think, the low 30s, something like that. Many places have closed their operations altogether. A lot of them, like the AP, have scaled back. And I'm in one of the best places. We have one of the biggest staffs. What you see is a lot of places are down south where they used to send a senior correspondent, and now they may just hire a freelancer, a local person who maybe is not as experienced and usually isn't even full-time anymore. So everything has been scaled back, and this has a huge ripple effect across the coverage of everyone.
Now, we could go on and continue and talk about the good old days. Were they that good old days? Yair talked before that on the that we don't have to have these days the journalism owned by tycoons. It was always like that. Lord Rothermere and Citizen Hearst, the famous Citizen Kane, Randolph Hearst, always, all the time, journalism was made by tycoons, and not only that, the fake news were. It was different then, but still, anybody who's seen the great movie Front Page, or anybody who remember the famous saying of Hearst when he sent his, not photographer, it was a war painter to Cuba, 1898, and he told him to cover the war. And after a couple of weeks, he writes back, he wants to go back to New York, and he said, there's no war, and Hearst tells him in a telegram, stay put. You'll furnish the pictures, I will furnish the war. So it's not as if anything new is invented today.
Yeah, I mean, I get the impression when I speak to colleagues, I've never heard anybody say, oh, my boss is telling me to write this thing or that thing about somebody. I'm sure it exists, and it depends on which organization. Again, I have the luxury of working for a nonprofit. The AP is collectively owned by about 1,500 U.S. newspapers. They pay dues to the AP, and they rely on us to provide news from all over the world. So I've never been in that situation, but when you speak, whether it's at the AP or any other organization, the number one concern is cost cutting. I think the lack of resources and the ever-shrinking supply of resources is a much bigger problem than at least in the foreign media, at least the major organizations. The biggest complaint I hear is just the cost and the pressure and the workload.
And you see lack of, for a better word, professionality. You don't see people anymore working 20, 30, 40 years, you know, the old hacks who used to be there day in, day out, writing about, I don't know, crime in New York or covering foreign news. The age of that is over. These days, somebody comes to work at a desk. It can be at Walla News where I'm working, moving to Haaretz after 2 or 3 years. The other day, I sat with a friend, Amnon Barkai, at Channel 10, and we sat there looking at the kids around us. And at one point, I'm telling Amnon, you are paying attention that both of us are in the second workplace in our adult life, and all the people around us, if they are not in their fourth place until they are 30, they feel stuck. So you don't see the people who are honing their skills. They are not there.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. But I do see hope. Do we have journalism students here? Any students? I get lots of students coming through town, either looking for internships or just interested in journalism careers or whatever. I tell every single one of them, look for something else to do. Think about another career. But if you're into it, if you believe this is your calling, you should go for it. And the one encouraging thing that I do see is the people who do go into journalism are extremely talented. We get really, really talented applicants, people who are so far ahead of where I was at that age, people with not only like computer skills, the ability not only to write, but also to take photos, to edit video, people who speak 3 or 4 languages. So there is some hope for it, but it's a tough career to go into, and it's tough, like David was saying earlier, it's hard to attract good people.
And But it's true for every career these days. The assuredness of work is not there anymore. You used to know that you go to, let's say, work in the factory line in Ford, and you go at 20 and you'll retire at 65, and everything will be fine. It's no longer there,
Yeah.
neither in journalism nor anywhere else.
No, that doesn't exist anymore.
But in journalism, there are other things. You have more pressure, any way you look at it. Tell me a little bit about it.
Yeah, the pressure. First of all, you have no personal life. I think it starts with that. You're working 24/7. The phone is going off at all times. Every weekend, every holiday, every family event seems to somehow get ruined. I'm terrified every time my kids have a piano concert that the phone's going to ring, that something's going to happen. So yeah, I mean, there's the workload, there's the demands, and then there's the pressures that you get from all of the people who are affected by what we do. I mean, I like to think that we still have some sort of impact, not so much on telling people what to think, but on kind of helping set the agenda, telling people what to think about. And everybody's paying very close attention to what you do. It's hard to make friends in this profession.
Both of us, in our respective places, cover foreign news. Today, a plane made an emergency landing in Manhattan. The entire world covered it. Something like 150 people were killed in Mali, and nobody gives a damn. There was a rule, the famous rule by a BBC, I think it was. It was translated to Hebrew by legendary editor Amos Goren in Kol Israel, saying something like, 10,000 people killed in monsoon in Bangladesh equal 5,000 Egyptians eaten by crocodiles in the Nile, equal 1,000 Bolivians who were killed let's say, in a military coup, equal 100 second-rate Europeans killed in a car crash, all of them equal 2 Britons killed in a crash, and all these together equal the Queen's Corgi who got a bad hair day. So the news is basically we are focused on 2, 3, 4 countries, 2, 3, 4, 5 issues, and the rest of the world be them, unless it comes to a point where you cannot ignore it anymore, let's say Rwanda or something like that.
Yeah, that's always been an issue, and I don't think it's something that's going away. I can't explain it. It has to do, there are market forces, there are, what are people interested in, what affects me, what's closest to my life. And also a big part of it is where are the journalists located? There are very few journalists in Africa, and the ones I know who are there are always complaining, why can't I get more attention? Why aren't people paying attention to what I do? So it's a combination of forces, and I think it's bigger than either one of us.
Yeah, it will not be solved today. And of course, journalism do a good job. Some will say, well, we are not doing a good job. Anyway, when we cover event, landing on the moon, 9/11, war, famine, whatever. But what about the things that are under, that we don't pay so much attention to because it's there all the time? The undercurrents, global warming, revolutions in let's say, personal freedom in Africa, in Iran. Today, perhaps in Russia, we see something with Golunov, etc. We do not cover the important stuff. We cover what we can see.
It's a very reactive profession, and I talked about the workload. I feel every day, I feel like I'm hanging off the side of a building by my fingernails, just trying to keep up with whatever's going on. And especially in this country, the news cycle, what you hear in the morning news, by the end of the day, people have forgotten about it. So many things happen in this country.
We forgot about it as well. It's for our own survival.
So getting to that more important stuff, it's a big challenge. It's something that we try to do. I know the AP has tried to do it. We try to do it here. We're not always successful, but we have special departments, enterprise departments that are devoted to working on investigations, to climate change and things like that. But there are fewer and fewer news organizations that have the resources to do that. I think that's dangerous for the public. It's dangerous for debate. It's a negative trend, and I hope it can be stopped.
How much of your work, the everyday work, is politics, is the Israeli-Palestinian or the Israeli-Arab conflict, and perhaps some kind of, let's say, colorful story, Hasidic world, etc., and some of it the way people live. You know, not all of us, you know it, but I don't know how many of your readers know it, take an Uzi in the morning and go to kill Arabs or to settle in the West Bank or to fight terror heroically or any of that stuff. How much can you, not only in Israel, in the world, show what actually interests the average Joe, average Moshe, average Jean-Pierre?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a very reactive profession. A lot of times the day is set for you by people who you have no control over. That's the biggest challenge. What we are interested in, by far, the conflict, Israeli politics, Palestinian politics, military affairs. I mean, that's the stuff that religion, obviously, is a big one. And then if you have that stuff under control, then you get to the more interesting, you get to the entertainment here and there, the culture or whatever. But we just seem to be going from crisis to crisis all the time, that you don't always get down to that other stuff.
And this is especially true for Israel or other countries as well?
It's like that everywhere. I think if I throw out the name of any country, what do you think of when you hear the word Russia?
Okay, so these days,
I'll answer it for you.
Okay, that's great.
Most
I was
people
hoping
say,
you'll get to that.
Most people will say
I'm
Putin.
tired of inventing questions. Okay, so when we hear about Russia, first and foremost, Russia for the average reader is Putin, and that's a great problem because we focus on the person and not on the country. So Putin, of course, is a world-class leader, is of course extremely influential in his own country. What happens the day after? Nobody asked about it. Who are the people around him? Who influences him? We don't do enough about that. We do not talk enough about Russian economy. 2 trillion as opposed to 20 trillion of the American economy, and how far they can get with that, because what they sell to the world is basically either oil, minerals, I should say, oil and gas, or weapons, and that's it. Nobody in this room has a Russian smartphone. Nobody in the world has a Russian smartphone. Nobody in the world has a Russian computer or a Russian high-end technology. So where do they go from here? We do not do enough. I did and maybe 2 articles in the last couple of years about the next big clash, which will be the North Pole between Russia, China, United States, etc. We talk about, of course, Russia in the context of the Middle East, of Iran, Syria, etc., but not enough about, there are, of course, the immigrants, the new olim from Russia. So Russia is extremely interesting. It's interesting and important. We do not do enough China in Israeli press. We do not do enough. We do not do enough European Union, unless, of course, there is some anti-Semitic or what is thought to be an anti-Semitic remark or something that can be interpreted as vandalism, etc. We do not do enough about those problems. Some of it Brexit, of course, we remember the British Raj in Israel, so
right,
no problem.
My point is, you could go from country to country around the world, and you'll have this same problem wherever you go. Especially when you're talking about foreign media, every country is boiled down.
You're in a good situation. When I was, let's say, in the early 90s, and then we had a program which Dudu Witztum, Emmanuel Alperin, and Michael Doron, my colleagues, and me founded, called Ro'im Olam, Seeing the World, and other programs like that. It was invented in 1988. Because it was the first Intifada, and on the weekend there were too many events and nobody wanted to see them. So they invented a news show, so we'll see things from the outside world. But in the daily basis, you had the Mabat, which was 30 minutes. Today, let's say 50. So you had room to 2 items, basically. And if at that, maybe 1, maybe none. Depends on the news cycle of the day. And that's basically was the news that everybody covered. And it was like that in Channel 2. And in Channel 1 it was better. In Channel 2 we had the radio, let's say, a daily program of foreign news, but it's in the ghetto. it's not news as they are part, like politics, like army, like everything else. It took many years to be part of the main news. It took years that it will open the news. I remember the major argument that I had convincing the editor of the day that Rwanda should open the news program. And when they did, I felt a personal triumph. And it was, 800,000 people dead at the time. So it was problematic.
You're right. I mean, there are things that we should cover, and there's always more stories that we should cover. But for whatever reason, and I think more and more, if there's one advantage of this whole internet era, it's we can really track what people at the AP, we can track what people want to read, what they are reading, and there are market forces involved. And I think if we flooded the newswire with stories about Rwanda, people wouldn't read our stories.
You are right, and there's another angle to that, the modern era. On the one hand, as we said, perhaps less professionalism, no more people committing their lives to that. On the other hand, and I don't know to say if it's good or bad, the BBC had the rule of shoot your own material. Channel 1 as well. I mean, what was put on the news is something that IBA reporters saw with his eyes, and the cameraman was there. We are not there anymore. We cannot be. 200 countries in the world, too many places to cover, so we receive the material from people on the ground. It can be amazingly important, Rodney King beaten in LA. It can be totally fake, and we cannot know the difference. That's the major problem.
That's why you need to rely on the AP. Okay? Because we have our cameramen everywhere, and when we do use amateur stuff, we have very strict vetting process.
I dare not tell him that I have AP and also Reuters. Okay, you want to open it for a discussion or for questions or remarks? They are numb in the end of at the end of the day.
Thank you both for a very interesting discussion. Question to you, Joseph. You have journalists who cover the Palestinian Authority, and you have journalists who cover Israel. How do you deal with conflicts among them, or are there conflicts? How do you handle this kind of bipolar coverage?
Yeah, this is one of the biggest challenges for me as a manager, is having this staff. Not so much that people don't get along, more that they barely know each other, because our staff in Ramallah, who are Palestinians, it's very difficult for them. More and more they can come into Jerusalem, but some of them can't, many of them can't. The staff in Gaza can barely get out of Gaza. The Israelis cannot go to Gaza, and going to Ramallah, some people feel nervous about that. So you have these three bureaus of people who know each other over the computer and over the telephone, but have very little human interaction. So that's a challenge to me.
I will ask it, I'll try to be even more harsh in my words. Yeah. Let's say this Palestinian, and it also applies to the guy in Myanmar or in Russia and elsewhere, he is not totally committed to the ethos of AP or CBS rulebook or whatever. He lives in a refugee camp. He wants to build his own state. He's afraid of the local state apparatus. He's afraid of the Islamic Jihad. And he's got his own agenda. How can you rely on him, or, for that matter, on the, if you would prefer, the Zionist, Israeli settler, etc., who's got also, he says, okay, journalism is fine, but I have my own agenda defending my kids and my people and to rebuild the temple or whatever. How do you do that?
Okay. First of all, that's a challenge. I get this question a lot, and I don't like when, nothing against you personally, but I don't like when people, it always seems to be in the context of Palestinian journalists. And I think you could ask that question about anyone,
and I
anywhere.
did, if
yes,
you remember.
Yes, you did. Okay. But I don't think it's fair just to pick on Palestinian journalists or anywhere else. Every journalist, wherever you go, has some sort of bias based on their personal experiences, the way they were raised, where they were raised, what they've gone through individually, and our challenge at the AP and anywhere else is to overcome that. And I have my own biases from where I grew up. I see things through my lens. And the challenge is to get everybody to think like an AP journalist. So it doesn't matter if you live in Gaza.
But you
or
are
Ramallah,
protected by
American
passport,
yeah,
and American consul, and your paycheck, etc. I'm protected, let's say, because I'm an Israeli living in my country. He is not protected. He is threatened by Israeli Shin Bet, by his organizations. If he'll stay, and we remember things like the famous Ramallah lynch, etc., about the people who had to uncover it, or recent events in, let's say, in Gaza, when somebody who said, okay, they are shooting from behind buildings, etc., they had to flee.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know what people go through in their personal lives, and there's always the risk that people are subject to intimidation. There might be some self-censorship, things that I never even hear about. But that's hypothetical. All I know is what I work with and what I see, and we all stick to the same set of standards. People file their stories to me, and if you look at our product, that's how you can judge us. Last week, the AP was the one. We broke a story about a big scandal in Ramallah, where we found out that the Palestinian cabinet gave themselves this huge, generous raise a couple of years ago secretly. We were the ones who broke that
story. They are learning too much from Israel.
We've written stories about Hamas torturing people out of Gaza. So I like to look at the bravery and the independence of our staffers, not at, everybody has different challenges. Everybody has different obstacles, and in Israel we have different obstacles. They're just different. They're more sophisticated, but there are all sorts of obstacles. And the trick, wherever you're reporting, is to figure out how to get around them.
And to bring the story. That's our mission at the end.
Guys, I want to thank Orna Hari and Joe Federman. Excellent talk. Thank you, guys. And there's more for some of us. Thank you.